Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our call today. We will get started shortly. Hi, all. Thank you for joining the call today. We are getting started shortly. We're just waiting 1 minute for people to join. Hi, everyone. While we were waiting for folks to join, I know that all of you are interested in finding out more about Ms. Williamson's campaign and Democrats Abroad's global presidential primary. If you want to help ensure that Marianne appears on our primary ballot, go to www.democratsabroad.org/Williamson to add your name to her petition. We also encourage you to sign the petition for every candidate that you want to see on the ballot for the Democrats Abroad global presidential primary in March. Get started by signing the petition for Marianne at www.democratsabroad.org/Williamson.
Great, thank you so much, Amanda, and we are live on Facebook. Welcome everyone who's joined, and really thank you for your presence. My name is Julia Bryan, and I'm the chair of Democrats Abroad. I'm joined by Amanda Mohar, our comms director, and Angela Fobbs, our Global Black Caucus chair, as well as our very special guest, Marianne Williamson. As many of you know, Democrats Abroad will run a global presidential primary next year. Democrats outside the US will have the chance to vote at over 100 voting centers worldwide and through remote voting too. Wherever you are, you'll be able to join in and cast your vote for the Democratic presidential candidate of your choice. To make sure voters abroad have the chance to get to know the Democratic presidential candidate, we've reached out to each campaign team, asking them to join Democrats Abroad in a global town hall so that you can hear from the candidates directly. This also gives everyone the chance to learn more about the issues that matter most to you and to the millions of Americans living outside the United States. If you'd like to send questions and responses to the Marianne campaign, please add them in the chat box. We'll share your feedback with the team. And if you'd like an answer, make sure you include your email. And now, I'd like to introduce our very special guest, Marianne Williamson. She's an activist and author of 13 books, including 4 New York Times bestsellers. She's the founder of Project Angel Food, which is a volunteer food delivery program which serves homebound people with AIDS and HIV and other life-threatening illnesses. She's also the co-founder of the Peace Alliance, which is a nonprofit education and advocacy organization supporting peace-building projects. She currently resides in Des Moines, Iowa, when she's not on the campaign trail. Marianne, are you ready to take it away?
Yeah, thank you very, very much, Julian. Thank you to all of the Democrats Abroad for giving me this opportunity. My parents traveled very extensively around the world. When I was growing up during the summers, my brother and my sister and I traveled as well. And there is no doubt about it, you have a different perspective, not only on the world, but I think you have a different perspective on your own country when you have traveled abroad. It's kind of like as one human being, you don't really know yourself until you know yourself in relation to other people. And our country, as we know, has historically carried a bit of an insular view of itself, largely because of our size. It was so long where we had this huge ocean to our left and this huge ocean to our right. And so we felt so separate from other people. Well, today, that geographical reality remains on the East and on the West, but it is no longer the socio-political reality. We are one world in a way that we have never been before. And I think of Barack Obama as the last United States president that had the luxury of seeing the world through the lens of the 20th century. It is a completely different world now. And I heard the Dalai Lama say that it was a British physicist who said to him that every American, not just every American, he said every nation should see every other nation as their domestic partner. That really impacted me because it expresses the way I see the world. we are not living collectively in a way that demonstrates the deep, visceral understanding of our interconnectedness in a way that we must if we are to survive for possibly even another century on this planet, but definitely another 2 centuries. I've been, as I think you'd hear from most Democrats, just appalled at the way the president, our current president, has pulled us away from our European alliances specifically. Even right now, we've got the G7 meeting. It's interesting. We'll see. We'll see what drama emerges this time. My campaign does not focus on the president. I'm focused on what's going to happen when the United States chooses to end this aberrational chapter of our history and begin a new one. But when I talk about the aberrational chapter of American history, I'm not just talking about the last 2 years, because I think the deepest problems were there. They predate this president. When I think of what's really wrong in this country, what's deeply, deeply wrong at the root level, these were things that were not created by Donald Trump so much as these are things that created Donald Trump. To me, they go back for 40 years. Ever since in the 1980s, we allowed the whole notion of trickle-down economics to just not just corrupt our government, but to hijack our very value system. The idea that short-term profits for corporations would become our new false god. It's a nation of idolaters. It's like we bow down to the very idea of short-term profits for defense contractors, health insurance companies, big pharmaceutical companies, chemical companies, oil and gas companies, gun manufacturers. First, this monster, the soulless monster, gets its short-term profits, as though as long as that's taken care of, then everything else will be okay. Well, obviously, it's the exact opposite of that, because our allowing that to happen has caused such a massive transfer of wealth over the last 40 years that we have 1% of Americans who now own more wealth than the bottom 90%. And this has created such wealth inequality. But behind that wealth inequality, behind the data, is such unnecessary human suffering and such an erosion of the democratic and humanitarian principles that are at the core of what make America good. And America cannot be great if America's not good. And I know many of you are now living in civilizations, and that's the point about a lot of European civilization. I love America. I love my country, and I'm sure that you do too. But who are we kidding? I mean, we once again, this is something else that happens when you travel extensively. I think that when having traveled abroad as much as I have, both as a child, as an adult, I have very strong realization of where, America's really got it going on, our spunk, our, we can do it isness, but also we're a little vulgar compared to other civilizations. We're much younger. And I know that some of you are living in countries where just the genuine quality of life is given more credence, whether or not people have time, whether or not people have time to spend with their families, whether or not people have time to really breathe in the richness of life, which cannot be created or uncreated by money itself. So I recognize at a very deep level what this short-term profit maximization obsession has done to my country. And that has formed a cancer underlying all the other cancers, because with the explosion of money and the unwieldy effect, the completely undue influence that corporate money has on our government, we're no longer a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. We are a government of, by, and for huge corporate interests. We need to repeal that 2017 tax cut that gave, was a $2 trillion tax cut. It gave 83 cents of every dollar to the richest individuals and corporations. We need to stop those corporate subsidies. We gave $26 billion alone to oil and gas last year. We need to be able to, I know many of you are living in countries where you see the US healthcare system, and other citizens in the countries where you live see the US healthcare system and can hardly believe it. And of course, it's the same as everything else. Health insurance companies and big pharmaceutical companies make more money because we have a sickness care rather than a healthcare system. There's more corporate profit on a short-term level basis to be made from a profit-making healthcare system. And it's obscene and it's immoral. My whole health plan And all of my policies you can find on marianne2020.com. My whole health plan not only provides universal health care, but it also speaks to why it is that we have such a higher level of chronic illness than do the citizens in many of the countries that you're living in. A lot of that has to do with the contaminants in our water, carcinogens in our food that many of the countries you're living in would not allow, toxins in our air, and so forth. Also, my whole health plan covers it covers an incentive for health. We don't incentivize health in this country. And that is because our healthcare system is so dominated by the idea of pharmaceutical measures, the traditional medical measures, as opposed to lifestyle changes, as opposed to diet changes, and et cetera. I also have as a pillar in my campaign the idea of a Department of Children and Youth, because we have huge vulnerabilities and challenges of millions of American children that cannot be absorbed with our existing agencies. You can read more about that. I also feel that the United States needs to pay reparations for slavery and take reparative measures for Native Americans. I want to close a chapter of American history. I want to open another one. And for a country, just like for an individual, you can't have the future you want unless you're willing to clean up the past. Germany has paid $89 billion in reparations to Jewish organizations since World War II. Obviously, it doesn't mean the Holocaust didn't happen, but it has gone far towards establishing reconciliation between Germany and the rest of Europe, and it is time for us to do the same. I also want a Department of Peace. I'm sure those of you living abroad are deeply aware of the erosion of the moral authority of American foreign policy. $360 billion arms sale to Saudi Arabia. What can you even say about those? So that they can prosecute an absolutely genocidal war on Yemen. Tens of thousands of Yemenis have died, including many children. Mike Pompeo, our Secretary of State, was asked how the United States could do such a thing. And he gave such a classic answer. This is the classic corporatist stance. He said that sometimes you have strategic partnerships with people who do not share your values. And my answer to that is no, you can't. That means you have no values. And to see the United States surrender all moral authority around the world in our foreign policy as an American president now cozies up to some of the worst dictators in the world and demeans and insults traditional Western allies is just tragic, and it'll take a lot of time to clean up the mess that has been created here. But a lot of that mess, like I said before, predated this president, and we have a good 20-year process ahead of us to really right the ship that has gone so terribly, terribly astray. But we can get started. We need a season of repair, and the American people need to be emotionally and psychologically enrolled in this notion of a season of repair. And without that enrollment, we're going to have a very difficult time making these changes that need to be made. The change, of course, that most needs to be made on an almost emergency, maybe the word almost isn't even relevant there. The change that needs to be made on a very, very urgent basis, of course, has to do with transitioning from a dirty economy to a clean economy. We have 7 years. I mean, it's such a short period of time. But if we do not take radical action, we could be seeing massive social collapse on this planet within 20 years. Whole swaths of continents, possibly even countries, possibly even continents, where the heat is so high that the land is literally uninhabitable. If that happens, obviously, food cannot be grown there. We're talking about the prospect then of massive food shortages, economic collapse, and possibly hundreds of millions of climate refugees. Many of you are living in countries where you're already seeing we've got 63 million displaced persons on this planet, the largest refugee humanitarian crisis since World War II. So let's just project ourselves ahead a little bit and see what would that mean when you've got hundreds of millions? I mean, it's the prospect of how nations would seek to protect themselves from what they perceive to be an onslaught is it's really terrible to contemplate. And then, of course, we've got what's happening here in the United States and how this government is treating humanitarian refugees down at the southern border. I'm sure that all of you agree with me that this is not just a critical moment in our lifetime. This is a critical moment in American history. It's a critical moment in world history. There was a post-World War II order, which, while not perfect, had a lot to say for it in terms of the Western nations. The United States has played with it like it was a toy. The United States' obsession with short-term thinking, particularly short-term profit-making thinking, has been like a sword into the gut of this country. And one of the reasons why I think that I'm the person to be the next president. Obviously, I think that every candidate does, otherwise you wouldn't be running. But I believe that what I offer, that not everyone does, is a real sense that we must make a fundamental shift now. We have to have a fundamental pattern disruption of America's political and social and economic patterns. Some candidates feel a more incremental approach. All we really have to do is just beat Donald Trump and everything will be okay. I don't think so. If all we do is beat Donald Trump, those same forces will be back in full bore in the 2022 midterms. They'll be back full bore in 2024. We need to do more than just not go over the cliff. We need to get out of the vicinity of the cliff, and we've been in the vicinity of the cliff for quite a while. So that's basically how I see this. And I also believe that there is an emotional intensity that will be necessary to counter the campaign that will be waged against the Democrats next year. I don't believe that traditional political strategy is going to be enough to override what this political cult leader is bringing towards us. And once again, some of you are living in countries where I think they have a much more visceral understanding of what he represents and how he's doing what he does, because World War II happened over there. And too many Americans, including too many Democrats, are living in la la land.
Well, thank you so much. That's really very interesting. And now I'd love to dive in a little bit more to specific policies. And our first question goes directly to what you were just talking about regarding the climate. Angela, do you want to take it away? Angela, there you go. Yep.
Yes, I do. Hi, good afternoon, Marianne. This question comes from our Hispanic and Progressive Caucus. The climate crisis is a significant contributing factor to the many conflicts and refugee situations around the globe, putting Americans abroad and all global citizens at risk due to political insecurity. How will you ensure the U.S. will reduce greenhouse gas emissions below the Paris Accord targets and lead the global effort to avoid catastrophic climate breakdown and the global insecurity it would cause? That's a big question.
Well, but it's really probably the most relevant question for the age in which we live, unfortunately. We have, as you know, withdrawn from the Paris Accords. Out of 195 countries that signed it, we're the only ones that withdrew. On the other hand, the Paris Accords now are almost like kindergarten compared to where we need to go. We need to go full on into a World War II level mass mobilization to reverse climate change. The Green New Deal done in the very, very highest way. We have, as I said before, 7 years. We must sequester the carbon. We must reforest. We must go full on into the investment in alternative energy, green energy, regenerative agriculture, et cetera. And we have to get rid of the animal factory farms here in the United States, which on one hand, they're immoral for one thing, well, the abuse of animals that they represent, but also, and in addition to the contaminants in water, and in addition to all the antibiotics in the water and the food because of it, it also represents the emanation of nitrous oxide and methane is so great that even if we did everything else, we would still have to deal with that. All of the things that I mentioned, we need to go on full on. We have 7 years. It needs to be World War II level of mass mobilization. It's going to be a very, very big deal because we have a huge ship that has to turn around here. There are thousands and thousands of people who work for industries that represent dirty energy. We have to change from a dirty energy to a clean energy economy. Now, let's go back a little bit here. The United States would not have done our part to help win World War II if, in fact, we had not used fossil fuels. So we have to give some deference here to the fact that there was a time when nobody knew it was a problem, right? And we need, and this is important, that we not just come at this from a direct oppositional position, because many of the industries that represent at this moment full-scale industrial harm will be needed to create full-scale industrial repair. And this issue of a just transition is extremely important to me. It must be done tenderly. It must be done respectfully. There are thousands of people who put food on their table and pay their rent, working in places that promote a dirty energy economy. They have a right to feel that the United States government has their back during this transition. We need to repurpose these skills, with the creativity, the productivity, the research, the development, the manufacturing into the efforts to go green and to reverse climate change. When you ask what role the United States could play, as you know, once again, are even withdrawing from the Paris Accords, right now, we're the ones holding back. I want us to leapfrog. I want us to leapfrog in so many ways. I want the United States to lead the global effort. But of course, in many ways, leading the global effort means, among other things, just demonstrating ourselves the best that we can do.
Thank you so much.
There was a small little follow-up they had. What do you think the U.S. president can do in early 2021, independently of the Congress or other countries, to respond to the crisis?
Well, the first thing you do is you have a world-class environmental scientist as head of the Environmental Protection Agency. Right now, the head of our EPA is an ex-chemical company executive. You can't even make this stuff up. And the one before him was an ex-oil company lobbyist. So the first thing you do, you get someone like a Jay Inslee in there. Washington State's going to have to fight with me in a tug of war, because I think his country needs him. But we'll see. If not Jay Inslee, someone of that ilk, the ilk of an Al Gore, the ilk of a Jay Inslee. We need a major. I would like it to be someone who not only knows, but can really, really capture the imagination of the American people. And so that's what I want. I want not only for the chief of the EPA to be that, but for the entire Environmental Protection Agency to become a magnet for world-class scientists. You know, you might remember, some of you probably do, given that you're living abroad, when this president was elected, and he made it very, very clear that the EPA would be on the side of the corporate overlords rather than on the side of the environment. I remember Emmanuel Macron put out a video saying, if there are any great American environmental scientists who want to come to France, we want you. It was heartbreaking. You know, it's like, oh yeah, send all the environmental geniuses away because they don't even have a place to be here. Well, that all ends. It's everybody come home, everybody come home, everybody come together. So that's the first thing, is who's head of your EPA and how you constitute the EPAs. There will be so much damage to do just immediately. I'll give you an example. This issue with pesticides and fertilizers is just particularly heinous. So there was a particular pesticide that was known for the harm it does to a developing child's brain. And every scientist during the Obama years had voted to permanently ban it. As soon as this president got into office, there was a secret meeting between the chiefs at the EPA and Dow Chemical in a hotel room in Houston, and they immediately overturned the ban. These are the kinds of things we can just immediately, there are a lot of things that immediately can be done to undo some of the most dangerous aspects of current policy.
Fantastic. And you talked a little bit about immigration already, but we have a question that's more specific to our membership. Amanda, would you like to ask that one?
Yes, thank you, Julia, and thank you, Marianne. This is a question that has concerned many of our members. Executive orders such as the one exploiting the term public charge demonstrate that our current immigration system was founded in a shameful era of discrimination and bigotry, and that family members of Americans abroad are allowed entry to the US through a patchwork of fragile band-aids and weakly defended interpretations. Would you restore the principle of family reunifications? How would your plan for immigration improve the situation for spouses, partners, and relatives of Americans living abroad like us who wish to return with our families?
Come home and bring your families with you, period, end of story. You know, this country needs to be returned to its people. The resources of this country belong to the American citizen. This is how you pursue happiness, by having your family with you, end of story.
Appreciate that. And here's another very specific to Americans abroad issue. There are actually two. We have two taxation questions. Regulatory guidance from the Treasury Department could alleviate the harms of FATCA that are suffered by thousands of Americans living and working abroad and trying to bank and invest money. Will you commit to direct the Treasury Department to study and then implement new guidance that provides relief to ordinary Americans who are living abroad and demonstrably not evading taxes?
Yes, I will. Yes, I will. Yes, I will.
Well, thank you. And Amanda, can you do the follow-up question?
Yeah, that's great to hear. Thank you. And a follow-up question. Most Americans living abroad think that the time has come for residency-based taxation, the principle guiding all other countries' tax systems and a fix for numerous unjust burdens on Americans living and working abroad. There are bipartisan, revenue-neutral proposals to implement residency-based taxation that include robust provisions to protect the law from abuse by tax evaders. All we need is a moment of leadership to get this done. Will you be that leader?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Why should you? Yes. Yes. I have a daughter who lives in London, by the way. So I have my own. Yeah.
Great.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much. And so we have another question that is also Americans abroad related. Angela?
This question is on healthcare. In a 2019 survey of Americans living abroad, Democrats abroad found that many cited the reason for living abroad as affordable healthcare. These numbers included healthcare refugees who cannot afford to return to live in the United States due to the high cost of healthcare and the threat of bankruptcy due to illness. Under your healthcare plan, will Americans currently abroad at all income levels or states of health be able to return to live in the U.S. and receive affordable, quality, accessible health care for their families at a reasonable cost and without the threat of bankruptcy?
Absolutely. My whole health plan, and once again, you can go to marianne2020.com and you can see this. My whole health plan absolutely provides universal health care. The idea that any American, wherever they live, any American is not able to receive the health care that they need is absolutely unacceptable. It is morally abhorrent to me. We have a situation, even as we speak, where because the government has surrendered its right to negotiate for lower drug prices with big pharmaceutical companies, we have Americans living here even now who are dying because they cannot afford their insulin. So absolutely, complete universal access to healthcare.
Well, thank you so much. It's very reassuring for many of our members to hear. We have one more question, and that's about voter protection. And that's, I'm not sure if you're familiar with how we vote, but we have federal legislation that provides protection for our votes, a little bit of protection, but it doesn't go far enough to counter the challenges that states and recently the Trump administration have set up to limit voting from abroad. We are particularly worried about postal ballots because almost 70% of all ballots are returned by mail due to state requirements, yet postal delivery is fraught with problems, and during each election, thousands of ballots do not arrive on time to be counted. How would you help protect the rights of Americans abroad so that we can vote while helping states ensure that ballots are returned safely?
I'm sure you're very aware of the voter suppression efforts that are rampant in this country. Ever since 2013, when the John Roberts-led Supreme Court started chipping away at the Voting Rights Act. So it's not just you guys, it's everybody. voter suppression is huge. And of course that those forces would look at you as a bunch of progressive bums and let's not let them in. I mean, you know, it's kind of obvious. It's like once somebody leaves the United States, they tend to have a more global perspective. They tend to have a more progressive leaning, not always, but most of the time. So that would be an easy mark for those forces. So I would see the protection of your voting rights and your vote, the protection of your vote, as part of a larger picture by which I'm very, very alert to the threat. That's not just for you, but for a lot of people, to make sure that your votes are not counted. It is a direct, it's not even an indirect, it is a direct attack on our democracy.
Well, we agree. We're working with Fair Fight and other voter protection groups around the United States to make sure that we can join in their efforts. And thank you so much for that answer. We also want to thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to dig into a few of the questions we deeply care about. And I want to just remind everyone on the call that Marianne's petition is on the website at www.democratsabroad.org/Williamson. That's www.democratsabroad.org/Williamson. Marianne, would you like to add a last word to everybody?
I would just hope that you will remember that even though you are separated by geographical distance from the United States, I know that you have a deep patriotism in your gut for the land of your birth, the land of your citizenship. We're in trouble today. We're in trouble. And I hope that you, like all of us here, will do everything that you can to rise to the occasion. You don't have to live here to be involved in what goes on in American politics. And even though many of the things that we talked about today specifically relate to your own circumstances, and understandably, I hope that you will continue to have a broad look at what's happening in this country and do everything that you can. It's a very serious moment. And I often feel with people abroad, particularly with Europeans, I understand why a lot of people are rolling their eyes about us right now. But I also think that many of the people who are the most disgusted by American policies today are also aware that this world will not be a better place if America goes down. I hope to work with you in the future. It's all hands on deck, no matter where your hands are. Let's save our democracy. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Marianne. It's been a true pleasure to talk to you and see you again.
Thank you.
And thanks for everyone who joined us today. We look forward to seeing you all in future candidate calls and at our primary next spring.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it very, very much.
Thank
Bye.
you, Marianne.
Thanks.
So I hope that you all have enjoyed our global town hall with Marianne as much as I did. Your support goes a long way. Please visit democratsabroad.org/donate so that we can continue to bring more events like these to Americans around the world. We'd also love to have your support as a volunteer. Next year, it's going to be all hands on deck. Sign up to democratsabroad.org/volunteer to get involved. New first-time volunteers are very welcome. With that, we're going to be ending the call. Thanks again to Marianne and to all of you for joining our global town hall today.
Bye, everyone.